Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Echeverria. I'm the VP of Engineering for LND Technical Services. I'm really excited here to be talking about PRC-28. I think this is a very valuable topic of discussion, especially for renewable developers, because this is going to be a big deal for them. So I'm really excited. I just want to get right into it and start answering your questions that we received for this session. Thank you. Hello again. This is the presentation I prepared for this discussion. I'm ready to dig into and see what kind of questions we received. I'm very excited to provide feedback. I like to do this kind of forum better because it's nice to kind of answer off the cuff questions that we may receive as opposed to kind of prepare these long, boring presentations. So I'm excited to go through these questions and see what we get. Thank you. All right, so let's see what we have here for the first question. All right, question one: what is PRC-28? So that's a really good, probably the most important question, because it's really important to kind of know what we're talking about here. So PRC-28 is a monitoring standard for renewable developers. Previously, there was a PRC-2, which is a monitoring standard for, it did include everybody, generator owners, transmission owners, right? For the bulk electric system. But as everybody knows, the bulk electric system, there's a pretty much bright line of 100 kV and above, right? So in essence, if you really only had to be compliant with the main power transformer, if the high side is 100 kV, right? And anything connected to any BES bus connected to that transformer. So pretty much all the generator breakers, any of the low voltage equipment was really not necessary to be monitored. So really, it was just a step up. That's it for the generator owners, which is very simple. So it never took, so that because of this wasn't really required to really monitor all the feeder breakers and all the generation, and when the trips and all that, it caused a big headache for NERC in general when a generator owner would go offline. Now, when a synchronous generator goes offline, it's, they're usually monitored from the utility and we know what's going on. But inverter-based resources, whether it's wind, solar, battery, when they go offline, it's not necessary because of fault, like typically for a generator, synchronous generator. They normally go offline because of a fault. These, as we know, IBRs can go offline, for a myriad of reasons. So, and we're not going to go into that, but because of that, though, is why PRC-28 came into effect. So PRC-2 really now is still in place for the main step-up transformer and into the BES substation, but below that, for the inverter-based resources, the collector bus and feeder breakers, of course, the main power transformers, and there's some other requirements for monitoring of that. So we know exactly why they go offline. So that's the short and sweet answer for PRC-28. But as an added bonus for PRC-28 is that this also gives the transmission planner, the transmission owner, way to get data so they can check that the inverter-based resource is monitored. It's modeled properly in their modeling software. So that's a big bonus. With this data that we get now, the transmission planner can now verify and validate the model of it that's in their system. So that's a good bonus for PRC-28. So that's my answer for question one. Ooh, sorry. All right, question two. Let's see. Which entities are responsible for adhering to PRC-28? Okay. All right, so talk about who's responsible and the implementation plan. So obviously the entities that are responsible for this is the generator owner. Okay, so the generator owner for these inverter-based resources are responsible, and with that there is an implementation plan. So like any type of standard, usually there's a new standard, usually there's an implementation plan in order to be compliant with that standard, right? So this PRC-28 came into effect on April 1st, 2025. And as we know, time goes by really quick. So now the first year is already here. So for existing generator owners of these types of assets, inverter-based resource assets, 50% of their existing resources, inverter-based resources, have to be compliant by April 1st, 2028. And 100% have to be compliant by January 1st, 2030. Okay. Now, if you only have one, most developers have several, but if you only have one, you have to be compliant by April 1st, 2028. Now, for new installations, for new inverter-based resources that are coming online, let's say now in 2026, uh, uh, you have until October 1st, 2026 to be compliant. So let's say you have something that came online recently, either late 2025 or early 2026, you have until October 1st, 2026 to be compliant. But any other new station, new IBR that's going to be put in service after October 1st, 2026 have to be compliant upon commercial operation. So that's the requirement now, and that's the implementation plan. So all the developers for these generating assets need to be compliant per that implementation plan I just mentioned. All right. So that's question 2. Good question. All right. Question 3. See what we got. Okay. Question 3. What counts as a disturbance monitoring equipment under PRC 28? Okay. All right. There's different types of equipment. Okay. What renewable developers have installed in their facilities, right? They're usually installed like these distributed control systems, DCS, or they may call them power management systems, at their facilities. They may have SCADA type systems at their facility. But from my recollection, from my understanding, working with developers in the past, all of them have some kind of monitoring equipment there, however they want to call it. However, they weren't obviously compliant with PRC 28 because they didn't know about PRC 28. So they were monitoring different things and to make sure that they the monitor frequency, voltage, anything of importance for the developer. That's how they programmed their existing monitoring equipment. But now you need to program it according to the standard, So now that's where things change now. So you can't just think that because you have a monitoring system, it's automatically compliant. It doesn't work that way. You have to now verify so that it meets PRC 28. So that's where the difference is. My recommendation to developers is don't just say I need a new disturbance monitoring equipment, right? The first thing is evaluate your existing monitoring equipment. I'm sure you have some really good engineers and programmers who said, I really want to monitor the alarms and the fault codes and the high low if the write through is set correctly. So there's a good chance maybe that it's already compliant, but you need to do that evaluation. So you got to go through the standard, go to requirement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and see, are you compliant? Are you compliant with the fault codes and alarms? Are you compliant with the sampling rates and stuff like that? So my recommendation is do that evaluation first and then see where you are. If you think you have equipment that can be reprogrammed to monitor what is required in the standard, great. If you see in your evaluation that it has the requisite sampling rates that are required per the standard, excellent. And if you have a time clock that meets the standard for a plus or minus 100 milliseconds to UTC time, great. You don't have to do anything. Okay. So the number one thing is evaluate what you have existing, and then you take it from there. So very good question. All right. So let's see. So again, when it comes to evaluation, evaluate it is whatever you're using for monitoring. Again, you might be having a standalone equipment and also have a SCADA system. So you need to monitor everything to see if you're already your existing monitoring is already compliant. All right. Next question. What minimum recording capabilities must be supported to meet PRC-28? So in kind of in line with what I was mentioning before, right? You gotta make sure that you're monitoring the main power transformer, right? You're monitoring all collector bus circuit breakers that are there, the AC to DC converters, the dynamic reactive devices, all those devices that are mentioned in the standard. You need to make sure you can monitor that. Okay, so if you weren't monitoring, the currents and voltages of the main power transformer, you need to now make sure you monitor that. If you didn't have alarms brought into your monitoring equipment, you need to monitor the fault codes, all the fault alarms, because we want to know when this IBR is faulted and needs to be taken out. Right. So there's a write-through standard as well. We're not going to get into that because that's another PRC-29, gets a little more complicated, but there's a write-through standard there. And part of the PRC-28 is to monitor where you are in that write-through. So if you do trip, you trip within the parameters of that write-through standard. So we need to monitor that. So that needs to be monitored. So, and you need to record all the statuses of those feeder breakers in the collective bus for the IBR. You need to, so that's sequence of events, so that when something happens, you can actually tag the sequence of how things happened before it tripped out. So you need to monitor that. We need to record, the DME has to have recording capability for fault records, right? So the oscillography, so we can see where in the power system did you trip off. Because when something happens, a fault happens, the monitoring equipment captures that fault. So there's a good chance that when something happens and the IBR went offline, not only do we capture the fault records of that and looking at the oscillography curves, but we can now match that with the utility side too, and which has also a requirement to capture fault records, right? So we need to capture the fault records on that. We need to make sure that the DME at the IBR has enough record length. So in the standard, to talk about, criteria for record length, sampling rate, trigger settings. So, all this is spelled out very clearly in the standard. So that all needs to be programmed appropriately. And then also now part of the standard too, that maybe the developer did not include in their original DME equipment, is the DDR capability, okay? Dynamic disturbance recording. That also is part of the standard now. And there's a good chance that even if you met everything, the actual equipment may not have that DDR functionality. So we need to make sure that the existing equipment can meets that standard, or the new DME that you purchase has to have it. And then lastly, of course, with R6 is the DDR is part of requirement 5, R5. R6 is about the time accuracy with UTC. The more modern day recording equipment, that's not an issue. But if you do have an older system, that could be a problem. Excellent question. All right. Okay. Question 5. How should disturbance data be configured so it's usable for analysis? It needs to be configured so you can receive the data from all the breakers that are required per the standard. Also the oscillography, right, from all the devices as well, from the shunt reactors, from the main power transformers. So it needs to be configured for that. So you need to configure it for like input data, right? So it's got to have IO, input output, right? So that you can get the input in from these devices. So the DME equipment has to be able to receive inputs from breakers, et cetera. And maybe if you're monitoring certain statuses, if it's just a binary type of thing, it needs to have that input in. And then, of course, you need to have recording capabilities. So you need to be able to have a DME that can receive voltage and current inputs. So that's another requirement to be configured. And then, of course, what I mentioned before, the DDR capability. You got to be able to measure that type of data, right? So those are the key things that needs to be configured. But then lastly, which is the most important part when you think about it, is when something happens, what do you got to do? You got to give this data. Somebody's going to ask for data. So you got to give this data in a certain way, right? So the data has to be able to be formatted in a CSV, right? So if you have a sequence of events, they can clearly see it, and then you can send that to NERC or whoever needs that information. And if you're catching actual fault records in oscillography, it's got to be in a ComTrade format. Okay, so then you can send that out, to a utility that's asking for this information. Just to rehash, you got to capture input data, you got to capture oscillography data, and you got to make sure it has capability for DDR, which is a longer sampling rate of data, and you got to transmit the data in CSV, okay, with like an Excel or whatever, and ComTrade, which is the oscillography way of sending records. All right, very good. Okay, next question. What is the most common compliance missteps? Interesting. From my experience, again, my experience is mostly from PRC2 because I was the director of protection control for many years at a Northeast utility. So one of the biggest compliance missteps on the DME equipment is time synchronizing. So you need to make sure, even though it's very easy, you need to make sure that it's synchronized properly. Okay, it's got to be synchronized to the standards. It's got to be time synced to UTC. You can have daylight savings time if you want, but the key is it has to be synchronized to UTC. So the biggest mistakes I've seen throughout my career is usually that not being done. Okay, so you need to do that. And the other part, again, is probably the two most common mistakes is time sync, and the other one is just the data storage. I know data is getting more easily storable, but it comes to a certain point where you need to have a repository for this data because this DME is constantly recording. There could be different things that happen that trigger it, and this data has to be stored in either electronically at a hard copy, but you should have a plan for where this data is going to be stored. So that's key. So when something happens, you know exactly where to get it and send it to whoever's asking for it. So you need to do that. So those are the two common missteps I've seen. Is those two. Records get run over. And then all of a sudden you don't have it. So NERC or is not going to come calling right away. Maybe they may come calling after they're doing some analysis somewhere else, and they say, you know what, this inverter-based resource tripped offline during this event we just found out. It could be a month later. Who knows? And they're going to come calling for the data. So you need to have it. If it's overwritten, then that's bad news. Again, that's a common misstep is how to get the records stored. You don't want records to be overwritten. Okay. All right. Great question. All right. Question 7. Let's see if we have a question. Okay. What does good compliance look like from a generator owner's perspective? A good compliance posture always looks good in front of NERC. So you need to be very vigilant in how do you handle compliance, right? So the good thing is you need to have a good compliance program. You need to kind of self-police yourself. Compliance is not something that you just do because you're required to do it and then you forget about it. That's the wrong way to do it. You need to be self-policing, self-vigilant, making sure you're always up to date with the next revision of the standard. You always have a continuous compliance posture where you're looking constantly, continuously to make sure you're complying with all the NERC standards. And the best way to start with that is to have a subject matter expert. Every utility, every GO developer should have an SME designated for their NERC compliance standards. That you need to have an SME in place. And then you have to have a good plan. So we haven't talked about the other requirements when it comes to the standard, which is R6 and 7. R7 is about the data. All right. So we need to talk about the data, and R7 is about the corrective action plan. So developing a good plan for R7 and 8 is very important. Okay. You need to know how to get this data, in the format that you're required to have it. Like I just mentioned that in the previous missteps, right? The data has to be secured and easily accessible, right? So that's R7, right? in the form that it needs to be. And then R8 is if you find out there's a failure with your equipment, you need to provide a corrective action plan to mitigate that, to correct it. Okay, so you got 90 days to develop this corrective action plan, and so you have to restore it within 90 days. So if you find out that something's wrong with your monitoring equipment, I'm hoping everybody has alarms and everything like that, but you need to see when the DME goes offline. So I definitely recommend periodic maintenance, like maybe every 3 months, having like a self check, to see if everything's working properly, everything's being stored. Have yearly checks to make sure everything's triggered correctly. So that's a good compliance posture, is to do periodic checks when you need to. I recommend every 3 months to just make sure everything kind of looks good and everything's working. All the records are being stored appropriately. And then every year, kind of do a triggering, to make sure everything's triggering properly and you're capturing records the one you're supposed to capture. So to me, that's a really good compliance program. And then lastly, my recommendation again is, because things can get very complicated, especially in like if you have a fully automated system. Again, I don't, nothing against automation. I'm definitely a proponent for automation, but when it comes to compliance, it can make things very complicated. So my recommendation, at least until now, until we get the automation more streamlined and easier to understand, as far as the training and training the engineers and everything, so they know where everything is, at least for now, to have a standalone DME. Okay, so this DME is going to be for compliance. You can still have another monitoring system that monitors every little thing and is fully integrated with the automation system and everything like that. But you need at least a standalone DME to say, hey, this is where I'm capturing my NERC compliance information, so that I know where to go easily. So if anything, God forbid anything happens, some fault that ended up triggering and taking your IBR offline, you know exactly where to go. You go to this piece of DME equipment, it has everything per the standard that's programmed appropriately. You know where to get the records, and then you send the record out to the person that's requesting it. So that's my advice for having a good compliance program, is to have that in line with a standalone DME equipment, at least for now. So really, I like to thank everybody for the great questions that you submitted. We're really looking forward to working with developers here at LND. We have excellent engineers who are trained, to understand these standards inside and out. We love to work with developers in the future if they need support. We have experts in not just this standards, but all the PRC standards and the NERC SIP standards as well. So if you are interested, please reach out to me. I'm easily available to answer any more questions. You can reach me through my email, which is alex.echeverria@lndts.com. Or you can call me directly at my phone, 914-906-0366. I'm here to help any way I can. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Bye.